afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webcast, Navigating Logistics, the Challenges in a Recovering Economy. My name is Ken Young. I'm an accounting and audit partner at J.H. Cohn. J.H. Cohn is one of the leading accounting and consulting firms in the United States, specializing in audit, accounting, tax, and business consulting services for public and private companies and not-for-profit organizations. Our presenting speaker is Kirk Shear, President and COO of Cohn Logistics. For more than a decade, Kirk has been the driving force behind the company's supply chain and consulting efforts. Before joining Cohn Logistics, Kirk held senior management positions with several major multinational corporations, including Sony, Digital Equipment Corp., Bristol-Myers, and Dynatech. Oh, and by the way, during his spare time, Kirk enjoys boating. He is an avid sailor of both power and sailboats, and you're going to need to remember that information for later on. A couple of administrative announcements. For those of you interested, this event qualifies for CPE. Accordingly, there will be periodic polling questions every 12 to 15 minutes to ensure you're still with us. Also, we will be taking questions. In fact, during the presentation, you can write and submit any questions you have. You will see an area near the right side of your screen for that purpose. We will get to as many questions as possible. Our outline of material being covered in today's presentation is as follows. Why is logistics important to financial decision makers? What is logistics versus supply chain? What has all the economic turbulence done to the market? What can shippers do about it? Contract management, shipment execution, data management, and analytics. Now, before we get started, Kirk, why don't you tell us a little bit about Cohn Logistics?
Sure, Ken, and thank you for the kind introduction. At Cohn Logistics, we're a logistics management and consulting firm. We're also proud to be J.H. Cohn's newest joint venture. As Cohn Logistics, we have been working with J.H. Cohn clients for a dozen years. As a result of our successful track record, the management team at J.H. Cohn felt it was time to formalize our relationship. We're actually old-timers in this business since we've been providing process improvement and savings for our clients for over 20 years. Even UPS Logistics and FedEx Logistics has only been around since the mid to late 90s. Our engagements include both fee-based and performance-based compensation alternatives, and our clients include some of the largest multinationals in the world. Companies like Hitachi at $120 billion in revenue, we've had as a client for 10 years. Konica Minolta has been a client for 13, but we also have many smaller mid-market companies as clients, including our first client ever, Tingley Rubber. We've continued to work with Tingley for 20 years, in which time we've helped them morph from a single location in South Plainfield, New Jersey, to a multinational with facilities in China, Guatemala, and Mexico, and they've outsourced all their distribution through an operation in the Chicago area. J.H. Cohn has an outstanding reputation as a first-class organization from top to bottom, and Ken, we're very proud to be affiliated with you.
We are also very proud of this affiliation. Now let's get started. Kirk, can you explain why logistics is so important? Why is it getting so much attention these days? And why should it matter to our financial executives participating in this webcast today?
Great questions. First of all, I don't know how many of you in our audience realize how large logistics is in the United States today. Domestic logistics costs alone consistently are over $1 trillion annually. What's $1 trillion? Well, I know I have an outstanding audience today full of high-level financial types, but most of you don't get to deal in trillions of dollars. This simple demonstration may get your attention. Here's $100. Currently, this is the largest U.S. denomination in general circulation. A packet of hundreds is about a ½ inch thick, and that's $10,000. $1 million is actually a little unimpressive. You could put it in a briefcase and walk around with it. $100 million, on the other hand, requires a pallet to hold it. $1 billion is a formidable sum and will require some dedicated warehouse space. Well, what about $1 trillion? What is $1 trillion? A trillion is a million million, it's 1,000 billion, it's a 1 followed by 12 zeros. And here's what it would look like on pallets in your warehouse. And yes, that's your warehouse manager down there in the left corner trying to figure out where to put it all. Looks like you're going to need more space. And did you notice that these pallets are double stacked? So please consider the size of your own industry in this context, and you will certainly appreciate the scope of our subject matter today. As huge as the logistics industry has been, since 2007 there's been a staggering decline, with logistics costs dropping almost $300 billion from almost 1.4 to just over 1.1 trillion in 2009. And although domestic logistics has been running at nearly 10% of our GDP for years, in 2009 there was a seismic shift and logistics was down to 7.7% of GDP. Next week, CSCMP, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, will release our annual State of Logistics report. This is the report that provides us these figures, and we do expect to see an increase in 2010 back towards the 2007 levels.
Boy, it seems like logistics is a red-hot topic. Why is that?
Well, Ken, I'm pleased as a supply chain and logistics specialist to get so much attention on the topic, but I must admit I'm a little surprised how much. Today these terms become household words. The main reason they have is because the big boys are bombarding us with TV ads. I'm sure you all remember the UPS whiteboard ads with the professional-looking guy who draws perfect trucks. Interesting to note that the guy doing the drawing is actually the creative director from the Martin agency that produced the ads. They simply liked him more than all the actors they auditioned. Well, the main point of the ads was to show us how everything is connected from suppliers in China to distribution centers in the U.S. They have been touting cradle-to-grave solutions in an effort to convince shippers that you can do it all, that is, handle all of your shipping and warehousing needs with just one provider. While this may be true for some shippers, it will be a very expensive alternative. FedEx and UPS have been wooing shippers with their vast network of planes, trucks, and distribution hubs and their sophisticated technology. For a number of years now, it has been said that UPS spends more than any other company on IT at over $1 billion per year. FedEx has plastered the airwaves with an assortment of ads from the caveman who got fired because he didn't use FedEx, even though they didn't exist yet, to the presentation guy who is a techie and not the right guy to bring to the meeting. They also spend a significant amount of their budget on the global supply chain. UPS must really love logistics. I'm sure you've all seen the new We Heart Logistics logo, as they've spent millions on their new ad campaign set to the 1952 Dean Martin classic, That's Amore. The ad is being aired in Europe and Asia and includes the lyrics, "When it's planes in the sky for a chain of supply, that's logistics. And there will be no more stress because you've called UPS, that's logistics." It's pretty corny, but it appears to be effective. I actually believe these ads are convincing many viewers that UPS invented logistics. It's hard to get away from them. Frankly, for fierce rivals, it's incredible how much alike they are. While FedEx is a marketing-driven company and UPS an operational organization, it's amazing how identical their pricing programs and rebate structures are. And they'll certainly round up the wagons to keep a competitor out. The two managed to keep DHL from getting a solid toehold in the U.S. market, despite losing several rulings in U.S. court. DHL, which is part of the Deutsche Post, the German post office, has deeper pockets than either of the homegrown firms. Nevertheless, despite committing 5 years and $5 billion, they exited the U.S. domestic market a couple of years back. They do remain a very formidable competitor in the world, especially on their home turf in Europe. While FedEx and UPS will team up when it's in their best interest, don't expect this anytime soon. Speaking of big players, even the Postal Service has jumped into the fray with its "If it fits, it ships" commercials. Recognize this guy?
Sorry to interrupt there. Kirk, I have a question, and I'm sure it's shared by a number of the people in our audience. What is the difference between supply chain and logistics?
You're right, Ken. A lot of people ask me that, especially since they're hearing the term so often these days. Supply chain is a broader, more all-encompassing term. Think of the supply chain as end-to-end. The supply chain is everything from the sourcing of raw materials to manufacturing a finished product to the last mile of delivery to a consumer, and it involves the collaboration and coordination of everything that happens in between. The supply chain involves collaboration between suppliers and customers, but also the internal cooperation and coordination between departments within an organization. Supply chain involves all facets of a business, including procurement, sales and marketing, product development, finance, and of course, logistics. Logistics, for its part, is an important part of the supply chain, actually a very important part. Logistics is a term originally coined by the military, and it's used as a means to describe the coordination of the movement of troops and armaments in and out of the field of battle. For our part, logistics is concerned with the distribution and storage of materials. There are many different definitions of logistics, but we like to use a simple, easy to remember one. Logistics is the management of inventory at rest and in motion. So whether it's inventory moving over the road, over the ocean, 35,000 feet overhead, or in your warehouse, the process of managing it is logistics. Ultimately, logistics and supply chain are linked at the hip, and you will often hear professionals in the field use them synonymously. There are four basic components of logistics cost. Transportation, which represents almost a half of all cost. Warehousing and inventory carrying costs, which each account for about 1/5. And administration and customer service, which account for about 10%. For most of you in our audience, these are big ticket items. In fact, for most manufacturers, distributors, and retailers, transportation alone is one of your top 3 costs. So I'm back to why this matters to finance executives. I believe finance executives should take note. A recent CSCMP study identified that 80% of CFOs surveyed either say that they are currently responsible for logistics or they acknowledge they will be in the next few years.
Well, I think you've answered the question of why this topic is important to our audience. From your charts, it's clear that economic cycles have a dramatic impact on logistics. Can you explain some of the areas that were most impacted?
Sure, Ken. Like so many businesses and other industries, logistics was ravaged by the events of 2008. As orders for materials dried up, logistics providers immediately felt the squeeze. Keep in mind, most logistics businesses survive on pretty tight margins to begin with. In early 2009, marginal profits had turned into losses, and in some cases, astounding losses. Freight transporters had to take drastic measures. In 2009, the volume of container trade contracted for the first time in history due to the severity of the worldwide recession. For the year as a whole, the volume of global container trade was about 9.5% below that of the corresponding period in 2008. As a result of declining volume and falling rates, global carrier revenues for 2009 were about 35% below those of 2008. However, based on provisional data for 2010, global container trade has recovered in the wake of the renewed growth of the world economy. This chart shows world container trade in terms of both loaded and empty container movements through ports globally. In the period from 2000 to 2010, port movements of loaded containers more than doubled from just over 200 million TEUs in 2000 to 540 million TEUs in 2010. Steamship lines mothballed over 1,000 ships, big ships, small ships, feeder ships. The biggest concentration of these ships is called the Ghost Fleet. As reported by Britain's Daily Mail, the biggest and most secretive gathering of ships in maritime history lies at anchor east of Singapore. It is bigger than the U.S. and British navies combined, but it has no crew, no cargo, and no destination. Even the largest container ship ever built and just commissioned in 2006, the M. Maersk, was even sidelined. Things got so bad for steamship lines that in the spring of 2010, TSA carriers announced an emergency revenue recovery charge of $400 per 40-foot container.
Now, hold on, Kurt. You mentioned TSA carriers. What is TSA?
Sorry, Ken. TSA stands for the Trans-Pacific Stabilization Agreement, and all the major pack-rim ocean carriers are part of it. Simply put, the TSA is an organization that allows a collection of carriers to get together and do things like set prices. And in the case of the emergency revenue recovery charge, the carrier said the $400 charge was necessary to boost their profits. I'm sure a lot of us would like to be able to do that in our own industries, but we could never get away with it. The Clayton Act and other antitrust laws prevent us from doing so, but the TSA did it and it stuck. Of course, they're not governed by U.S. law.
Well, what about on the domestic side?
Domestically, companies took a beating. Trucking companies also parked equipment in droves and laid off thousands of drivers. Truckers battled one another to get the reduced volume of business that was available, which led to prices being slashed. In the less-than-load industry known as LTL, carriers became